Ho, 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 to the bottle I go, to tell you things and cause you woe. Cheers! Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about something book adjacent and be unpopular on the internet. That's what we're doing today, because I'll tell you why the new Lord of the Rings audiobooks narrated by Andy Serkis are in fact bad. Yes, I know y'all will disagree, but please hear me out, because the longer you play this video, the better it'll do in the algorithm, and I need that, exposure. Anyway, we'll be talking about the Andy Serkis versions of the Lord of the Rings audiobooks, about audiobooks in general, and some of the problems with them. So strap in and, like, subscribe, write angry comments down below. They do help, and maybe help me on Patreon if you feel like it. And if you already do that, thanks! You're helping me out a bunch. And now let's get to it. Alright, so over the last year and a bit, there have been new versions of the Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and now the Silmarillion audiobooks narrated by Andy Serkis, who played Gollum and did apparently voice some of the orcs and stuff in, Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson back in the day. So there you go. And people have been very happy with them and have been wild about them. A lot of people really enjoy them and think they are some of the best audiobooks out there, some of the best ways to actually enjoy Lord of the Rings, and so forth. And I do kind of disagree, and we'll explain why. But I want to make it very clear. From what I can tell, they are highly, highly entertaining, and thus probably successful. And if you enjoy those books, that's fine. If you enjoy these versions, go for it. Enjoy them even more, every year. That's what, cool people do. But please consider what I have to say about it. And, we'll be talking about other audiobooks later, but I picked this one because it is very, very explicit as an example of what I want to talk about today, which is, well, imagination and freedom of interpretation. So one of the things that happens when you look up reviews for these new audiobooks, a lot of people are really happy that Andy Serkis changes his voice a lot. He's an actor, he's good at that, and does, in fact, take a lot of inspiration from, the different accents of different, actors in the Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson back in the early 2000s. And people really, really appreciate that and think it's a mark of quality for these audiobooks. And that's where my issue lies with, at least to begin with. So let's talk about why people love that. Well, these movies have been quite successful and have had a huge cultural impact. In fact, there's a lot of people out there who have seen the Lord of the Rings movies by Peter Jackson and have never read the books, or haven't read the books before they watched the movie. And, that's fine. But that's their version of how the Lord of the Rings works, and their thoughts about Lord of the Rings are more impacted and formed by the movies than the actual texts. So these people will be very, very happy to, when they go and actually listen to the audiobook, have a version that is closer to the movies than it may be in some regards to the, just pure written down text. And that's what we need to talk about, because it's about interpretation. Every adaptation is an interpretation. Well, interpretation is what we all do when we consume any form of media, any media text, whether it's a movie, whether it's an audiobook, whether it's a radio play, whether it's just a text. We do a lot of interpretation. And depending on what medium we're using, there's more work we as the consumer, we as the audience need to put in. See, a text allows a lot of freedom of interpretation and imagination. And I think it's very easy to explain that. See, if you read a text, it says some things like, they came down the road and passed a house. So what happens when you read that sentence? Well, you imagine, probably, depending on how your brain works, how visual your imagination is, you imagine, a road and you imagine a house. But how does that house look for you in your brain? Well, I'd wager if that's the first sentence you read, that, it'll look very much like houses in your area, probably. Depending on, framing whether you think this is a fantasy novel, those houses will probably look slightly different than when you think it is a realistic fiction or whatever. But a lot of your imagination will be, mostly built up by, your personal experiences and your cultural background. That's just how it works. Even the unknown, and at this point undescribed, they will probably look like people around you when it comes to, skin color, hairstyles, that kind of stuff. All things being equal. And what happens is that over a text, the author can add details that will limit your freedom of, imagination. At some point, you may get a more detailed description of the house. You may get names and genders and, detailed descriptions of these unnamed they that I just spoke about. And that will, sometimes go against what you imagined at the beginning. Because maybe you'll now learn what kind of hair they have, what kind of skin color they have, what kind of clothes they wear, and so forth. And that limits your freedom of imagination. Now take a text like, say, Lord of the Rings. You read the books, and you have some descriptions, but only some descriptions, right? For example, I don't think the actual hair color of any of the hobbits is ever mentioned in the Lord of the Rings books. Don't nail me down on this one. It's been ages since, it's been January when I last read it. So there you go. I don't think they are mentioned at any point. There is obviously an essay that talks about general hair color and whatnot of hobbits in general, but that's it. So there you go. But if you go and watch the Lord of the Rings movies, suddenly you get very detailed images of how these hobbits look, how Gandalf looks. Gandalf gets a more detailed description in the book, but so you kind of know that he's got bushy eyebrows and grey hair and a long beard and shit like that. But for the hobbits, these images will be beamed into your brain and take away some of your interpretive freedom. That's what we're talking about, the freedom of imagination here. They will take those over and replace them with the images that you see in the movie. Suddenly Rivendell looks like it does in the movies. Suddenly Gondor looks like it does in the movies, and so forth. And that is just how culture works. That is just how media works. It's, every medium allows a certain, degree of freedom of imagination, and film has a lesser one than just the written word. Now, is that good? Is that bad? It doesn't really matter, because it's just a fact of how these different mediums work. And what that means is that for a lot of people that grow up with the Lord of the Rings movie, it's by Peter Jackson and not the one by Ralph Bakshi, which is objectively superior in every possible way. Anyway, even with that one, depending on which movie you watched first, and depending on, your access, that will be the dominant interpretation, the dominant image of what Lord of the Rings is. Well, what an proper director does is they take their view of what the story entails and put it into a movie. So you will be hard put to it to actually come up with a different idea of what Lord of the Rings is about than the things that Peter Jackson puts into these movies, which is, just how movies work. In that case, Peter Jackson and New Line Cinema have colonized your imagination. And this brings us back to the audiobook, because audiobooks do the same thing. Because, you probably imagine how characters speak, what kind of accents they have, unless it's, written out explicitly in the text when you read a text to yourself. But once you hear an actor performing them, these voices will change in your brain, because these will be the voices. And that, once again, takes away a degree of imaginative freedom, or freedom of imagination. Because someone else has made these decisions for you. The actor, usually, the voice actor, reading and creating an audiobook. Performing it. We call it performance for a reason, right? And that's once again a degree of interpretive freedom that has been taken away from you. Now, in the case of these new Lord of the Rings audiobooks, these decisions of which accent to use, where, and whatnot have been taken away from you, because Andy Serkis decided to use voices that are more or less similar, or accents that are more or less similar to those of his fellow actors during the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies. That interpretive freedom has thus not necessarily been taken away from you by Andy Serkis, but already by Peter Jackson. And over that, the film adaptation and the film interpretation that Peter Jackson made back in the late 90s and early 2000s is now colonizing the general image of the text, even in the audiobook. And that's where I find that problem, because I think it illustrates very well the problem of, audiobooks taking away interpretive freedom, and thus bringing you a filtered and interpreted version of a text, not just the text, which is why some people go and claim that audiobooks, or listening to audiobooks, is not the same as reading. Well, it is not the same objectively, because someone else has already made decisions that you could make in your own imagination if you were to read the text. So that's the main argument why I think there is something troubling about the popularity of these new Lord of the Rings audiobooks by Andy Serkis, because you get a very specific version of Lord of the Rings, even though it's not the movie. You get it most close to the movie as possible with these audiobooks. And that's, well, it takes away power from the reader, as they say. Now let's look at why they are so popular beyond that and go to other audiobooks as well. People find these entertaining because, imagination is hard work. And the more of that is taken over by someone else, because they perform something, they take away part of your freedom of imagination, the easier it is to just, consume that, to just go and listen to it. And someone else has already done a lot of that hard cognitive work for you. So there's reasons why more entertaining performances, more performative versions of texts are very popular. They're easier to consume, and, looking at the world out there, life's stressful enough. Sometimes we just want to get bombarded by, nice entertainment and not to do the thinking, which is fine. So there's something. And when you look at audiobooks in general, a lot of people talk about why they love newer performances, audiobooks that have sound effects added to it, audiobooks that do have, numerous different voices, different actors, and so forth, a larger cast. People love that. And it's arguably one of the reasons why audiobooks have become more popular in a lot of ways. Discworld has recently got a relaunch of audiobooks as well, because people have been complaining about the quality of the older audiobooks. Now, obviously, the sound quality is not, up to snuff, because some of these audiobooks are like 30 years old and were, recorded on tapes and stuff like that. And, people also kind of probably found some of the narrations by these different older actors not so interesting, to put it mildly. Now they have different actors, different voice actors for different characters, different subsets, sub-series of the Discworld series, and people love those audiobooks as well. Just another point where we see that more entertainingly produced, more performative versions of audiobooks are more popular with a large subset of audiobook consumers. But, once again, the more performative these are, the more these are interpretations that differ from just the blank text and take away interpretive freedom from the listener in this case. All right, so why is this an issue and why is it not? See, but there's obviously people out there who go like, yeah, but audiobooks aren't properly reading, and then some people get really mad at it, and you have like arguments on the internet, and I personally don't care that much. If you prefer to get a story told to you in an entertaining way, go right ahead. Just be aware of the fact that some of the decisions of how to read this text were made by someone else. Be aware of that and maybe ask yourself why. Look, for example, at accents. Are they overplayed? Do the villains in a story what kind of accents do they get? Are those accents of marginalized groups, of, migrants, whatnot? There's, for example, an argument that, giving some of the hobbits, or not the hobbits, like the Harefoot in the, Rings of Power movies from last year's series, giving them Irish accents. If you know about colonialism in Ireland, Irish accents have had a, negative stereotype attached to them for a long, long time. Other accents, the same kind of thing. So if someone makes these decisions for you, you get to partake in their probably subconscious racism. Ain't that fun? But yeah, see, that's one reason why I think it's important to be aware of the fact that when you consume an audiobook, when you listen to an audiobook, someone has made decisions for you, and you need to question those decisions, ideally, if you want to get closer to the meaning of the text. Think about it. It's just another layer to it. Now, let's move on to the sort of final part here. Because, as you may or may not know, I've listened to a few audiobooks in my life. Well, actually a few thousand at this point. Because I'm blind, and audiobooks are a very, very easy, often the best possible way for me to get to a book. Because yeah, I'm not really good at reading Braille. Not in a long, if I need to read a long text. So audiobooks are great. I'm kind of relying on them, is my point here. So I'm sometimes angry, or not angry, but like disappointed when I listen to an audiobook and it overdoes the theatrics, because you know what? I'd rather do the imagining for myself here. I just want the text. And you can go like, yeah, then maybe use your computer voice, your screen reading computer voice to read books to you. And I've done that. I've done that back in the day before there were, for example, Glenn Cook's The Black Company audiobooks available on, say, Audible or whatever. I got the ebooks and I had my computer read them to me. It's not fun because computer voices in the late 90s, early 2000s weren't really that good. Nowadays, they are obviously much better in a lot of ways, but that's what I had back then, and that's what I listened to. And at some point, I decided it would be slightly more bearable if I take some instrumental music, film soundtracks, computer game soundtracks, whatever, build like a random playlist and have that play in the background of my computer voice reading fucking Glenn Cook to me, because it was more entertaining. So I do get that idea of, wanting a more entertaining version of a text, because just the bare bones text in a bare presentation may not be enough, or may make it harder to just coast through a story and enjoy just the story. It's not that easy because, as I said, imagination and interpretation are hard work. And if you just have, just the bare bones text, it's very easy to, it's very hard to not go and start thinking about something and interpret. It's just how our brains are wired. So I'm sitting here, and on the one hand, I am happy that we get a lot of audiobooks, and this is where we kind of end this in what you might call aporia, which is a fancy word for I don't know shit. Anyway, my argument here is that on the one hand, having more entertaining audiobooks does help me, because it means there will be more audiobooks, because obviously more entertaining, more performative audiobooks are popular with people. And because we live under capitalism, which sucks, it means that a lot of people are going to buy them, and there's a chance that more of the books that I really want to have access to will be made into performative and entertaining audiobooks. People will be really happy about that, and I get at least one version, maybe not the perfect version that I want in my brain, but at least I get one version of the text, and that's, that's something. Accessibility is great, and I really appreciate it. On the other hand, of course, there is the fact that all I get is a more and more performative and more interpretive version of that text, making it harder for me to justify my opinions as fully my own, because, I already got an interpretation here. And it means that I always have to factor in basically an interpretation or analysis of the audio performance on top of the, just text read to me. And that's kind of frustrating. And I don't know where I fall on this. On the one hand, at least I get the text. On the other hand, they get less and less just the text and more something else. And that annoys me. And let's end this on a final thing here. Like, a lot of discussions on the internet around audiobooks are made by people who have the choice to go and read books, listen to audiobooks and not. And a lot of times people go and criticize narrators. One example is people talking about the audiobooks for The Realms of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb, and people really don't like the narrations for those. And I have no idea why, because as someone who has listened to at least some of them, at least at this point, look, I don't mind. I've listened to some, not really perfectly trained actors read audiobooks. I've listened to those kind of things. And you know what? I survived, and I got the text, and at the end of the day, it's the text that I want. It's not the performance. And when you look at how little, audiobook narrators usually get paid, unless you are, Andy Serkis, for example, then going out and, basically talking shit about people's performances when what they did was a great thing, because they made a text accessible to a whole new group of people who can't actually read or can't afford to read because they don't have the time to sit down with a book. They did a great fucking thing there. And saying, oh, this is unlistenable. No, it's not. You're just not making the effort because you have the choice to ignore that. And I think that's a very, very sad approach to the whole thing. And that's basically it. That's why I think the new Lord of the Rings audiobooks, while highly entertaining, and please go and enjoy them if you want, do actually point to a larger issue within our discourse on audiobooks and stories. And I'd love to hear your opinions about all of that down in the comments. And, like, subscribe, maybe share it with a friend, or share it with an enemy if you disagree and you want to, upset them. I get it. Do all of these things. Should you like to support me, there's some links down there. I could really, really use some help at this point in my life, but there you go. Mostly, thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one when I don't know, talk about something else. And yeah, thanks and cheers.